The first time I realized I might regret marrying a billionaire, I was standing alone in a ballroom full of crystal chandeliers, surrounded by people who knew my husband's net worth better than they knew my name. I was 22, wearing a diamond necklace worth more than my parents' house, and I had never felt so small. If stories about love, power, and the price of ambition fascinate you, stay with me until the end. And if you believe fairy tales sometimes hide sharp edges, subscribe and leave a like. What happened to me might change the way you see them forever. My name is Elena Ward. At 22, I looked younger than my age. I was 5'6", slim without trying, with pale skin that flushed easily when I was nervous. My hair was long and chestnut brown, usually falling in soft waves down my back. My eyes were light green, the kind people called innocent. I hated that word. Innocent meant unprepared. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. My father worked as a mechanic, broad-shouldered and permanently smelling of engine oil. My mother taught literature at a public high school, small and graceful, with silver strands already weaving through her dark hair. We weren't poor, but every purchase was discussed. Luxury was something we saw in magazines at the grocery store checkout. I met Adrian Vale at a charity gala I wasn't supposed to attend. I had been invited last minute by a friend who couldn't go alone. I wore a simple black dress that hugged my waist and fell just above my knees. It was elegant but modest, bought on sale and altered by my mother. I felt out of place the moment we entered the marble lobby of the hotel. And then I saw him. Adrian Vale stood near the center of the room, tall and composed. He was 39, nearly 17 years older than me. His dark hair was cut short, brushed back with precision. A faint line ran along his jaw where a childhood injury had left a thin scar, barely visible unless the light caught it. His eyes were steel gray, sharp and observant. He had the posture of a man used to being obeyed without raising his voice. His suit was midnight blue, tailored perfectly to his lean, athletic frame. He wasn't bulky, but there was strength in the way he moved, controlled and deliberate. When he laughed, it was low and measured, never too loud. He noticed me staring. Instead of looking away, he walked toward me. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedarwood and something colder, almost metallic. His gaze didn't wander over my body like other men's did. He studied my face, as if evaluating something more complex than appearance. "You look like you're deciding whether to escape," he said calmly. His voice was deep, steady, confident without being aggressive. "I might be," I replied. He smiled, just slightly. Not warm, calculated. That was the beginning. He asked about my studies. I told him I was finishing my degree in art history. He listened. Actually listened. He remembered details from our first conversation weeks later. He sent flowers to my apartment, white lilies arranged perfectly. He invited me to private dinners in quiet restaurants where waiters treated him like royalty. Within a month, I was riding in the back of his black car with tinted windows, escorted by a driver who never spoke unless spoken to. Within 2 months, I had met his executive team. Men in tailored suits, women in severe dresses, all with sharp eyes and controlled smiles. They looked at me like I was a temporary accessory. Adrian owned technology firms, real estate developments, and investment funds. The numbers attached to his name were impossible to comprehend. Billionaire. The word felt unreal. But with me, he was attentive. He touched my lower back when guiding me through doors. He brushed a strand of hair from my face as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. He told me I was different from the women he usually met. "You're not impressed by money," he said once. He was wrong. I was overwhelmed by it. The proposal came on a private terrace overlooking the ocean during a weekend trip to California. I wore a white silk dress he had chosen. The wind lifted my hair as the sun dipped into the horizon. He didn't kneel immediately. He looked at me for a long moment, almost studying my reaction before speaking. "Marry me, Elena," he said finally, taking out a ring that caught the last light of the sunset. The diamond was large, flawless. My heart raced. I thought of my parents' small kitchen, of student loans, of the way people looked at him with respect bordering on fear. I said yes. Not because I didn't love him. I believed I did. Or maybe I loved who he seemed to be. Controlled, powerful, protective. At 22, protection feels like romance. When I called my mother, she went silent for several seconds before speaking. My father cleared his throat more than once. They had never met a billionaire. Neither had I, not really. Within weeks, my life transformed. Stylists appeared. Designers took measurements. Security staff began accompanying me discreetly. My phone buzzed constantly with wedding planners and publicists. Publicists. That should have been my first warning. Adrian moved through the process like he was negotiating a merger. Calm, precise, decisive. Guest lists were reviewed, venues inspected, contracts signed. I told myself this was what stability looked like. I didn't yet understand what ownership looked like. And I didn't realize that by the time I walked down that aisle, I would already belong to a world that never intended to let me leave unchanged. The wedding was scheduled 3 months after the proposal. 3 months to transform me from Elena Ward into Mrs. Vale. My dress was custom-made in Paris. The designer, a thin woman with severe cheekbones and perfectly symmetrical features, examined me like a sculpture she intended to reshape. The gown was ivory silk with a structured corset that narrowed my waist and emphasized my collarbones. The neckline dipped just enough to suggest elegance without scandal. The train extended behind me like a statement. I barely recognized myself during the final fitting. My brown hair had been subtly lightened, styled into glossy waves. My makeup was softer than I usually wore, but precise. My green eyes looked brighter under professional lighting. "You look timeless," the stylist whispered. I felt curated. Adrian handled everything else. The ceremony would take place at a private estate outside New York. The guest list included investors, politicians, celebrities. My parents' names were there too, near the bottom. When my mother saw the venue for the first time, she stood silently beside me. She wore a navy dress we had chosen together, simple and tasteful. My father looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, tugging at the collar as if it restricted his breathing. Adrian greeted them with polite warmth. He shook my father's hand firmly, maintaining eye contact just a second too long. My mother later said his eyes were beautiful, but cold. On the morning of the wedding, security swept the grounds twice. Black cars lined the private driveway. Staff moved efficiently, almost invisibly. Everything was timed. I stood in a sunlit room overlooking the gardens. Rows of white chairs had been arranged outside beneath towering trees. White roses framed the aisle. A string quartet rehearsed softly in the distance. My bridesmaids, women Adrian's assistant had recommended, not childhood friends, adjusted my veil. They were elegant, poised, strangers. When I walked down the aisle, hundreds of eyes followed me. Cameras flashed discreetly. I saw my parents in the second row. My mother was crying quietly. My father's jaw was tight. And at the end of the aisle stood Adrian. He wore a black tuxedo tailored to perfection. His posture was straight, hands clasped calmly in front of him. The faint scar along his jaw caught the light. His expression was composed, almost unreadable, until our eyes met. Then he smiled, controlled, certain. As I reached him, he took my hand. His grip was firm, grounding. The vows were traditional, carefully chosen. He spoke clearly, confidently, promising protection, partnership, loyalty. When it was my turn, my voice trembled for a moment before steadying. When he slid the ring onto my finger, applause followed. The sound felt distant, like it belonged to another life. The reception was extravagant. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. Tables were covered in white linen and gold accents. Waiters moved with synchronized precision. A live orchestra played softly as guests mingled. People congratulated Adrian on his brilliant match. They congratulated me on my fortune. I noticed how often they addressed him first. During our first dance, his hand rested securely at my waist. His movements were confident, leading without hesitation. "You're doing perfectly," he murmured. "Doing?" I asked quietly. "Handling this," he clarified. Later that night, after the guests had left and the staff had begun clearing the hall, we were driven to his Manhattan penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. The lights below shimmered like scattered diamonds. The apartment was immaculate, minimalist, expensive in a way that didn't need decoration. I stood near the window, still in my gown. Adrian removed his jacket slowly, placing it over a chair. He looked at me thoughtfully, almost analytically. "You were impressive today," he said. Relief flickered through me. "Thank you." He stepped closer, brushing his fingers along my jawline. His touch was gentle, but there was calculation behind his eyes. "You represent us now," he continued. "Everything you do reflects on my name." "Our name," I almost corrected. I didn't. I nodded instead. He kissed me. But it wasn't the passionate kiss I had imagined on my wedding night. It was controlled, measured, as if even intimacy followed a structure. That was the first moment I felt a shift. Not rejection, not cruelty, distance. The next morning, I woke early in unfamiliar sheets. The sunlight poured into the bedroom through automated blinds that had risen at precisely 7. Adrian was already dressed in a charcoal suit, checking messages on his phone. "You're up early," I said softly. "I have a board call in 20 minutes, he replied, without looking up. "It's our first morning," I said, attempting a smile. He glanced at me then. His expression softened slightly. "And we have a lifetime," he said calmly. Before leaving, he paused at the doorway. "My assistant will send you the revised schedule for next week. There are 2 public appearances and a foundation dinner. Review them." I sat upright. "Revised schedule?" He studied me for a second. "You didn't think this would be random, did you?" The door closed gently behind him. I remained in the silent bedroom, the city humming far below. For the first time, the word wife felt less like romance and more like a role I had just signed on to play. The first week of marriage unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Every morning at 8, a housekeeper entered silently to tidy the bedroom. At 9, a nutritionist delivered a customized meal plan. By 10, a stylist reviewed my wardrobe for upcoming appearances. My phone no longer buzzed with friends asking about honeymoon plans. It buzzed with calendar updates sent by Adrian's assistant, Clara. Clara was in her early 30s, tall and sharp-featured, with straight blonde hair cut into a precise bob. She wore tailored gray suits and thin rectangular glasses that made her blue eyes appear even colder. She never smiled without reason. Mrs. Vale, tomorrow's charity luncheon requires a softer look, she informed me during our first meeting in the penthouse office. Pastel tones, understated jewelry. Approachability is key. Approachability. I nodded, unsure whether to laugh or object. Adrian returned late most evenings. When he entered, the apartment seemed to shift around him. He was rarely disheveled, rarely tired. His dark hair remained immaculate, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture unwavering. At dinner, he asked about my day with polite interest. "How was the fitting?" "Fine," I said, though I didn't realize I needed approval for every dress. "It's not approval," he corrected calmly. "It's alignment." With what? With the image we're building. There it was again. We. But I began to notice that we usually meant his plans, his vision, his empire. The first public appearance as Mrs. Vale was at a children's hospital fundraiser. Cameras flashed as we stepped out of the car. I wore a soft blush dress that highlighted my skin tone. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, low bun, making my features appear sharper. Adrian placed his hand lightly at the small of my back, guiding me forward. His touch looked affectionate from the outside. Inside, it felt directional. People approached him with admiration. Investors praised his latest acquisition. A senator complimented his strategic foresight. When they turned to me, their smiles shifted, curious, appraising. "So young," one woman murmured, not quietly enough. "She'll learn," another replied. During dinner, I leaned toward Adrian. "They think I'm temporary." He sipped his wine before responding. "Perception changes with time." "And if it doesn't?" His gaze settled on me, calm, unblinking. "It will." The conversation ended there. That night, I stood in the walk-in closet larger than my childhood bedroom. Rows of designer dresses lined the walls. Shoes were arranged by color. Jewelry rested in velvet compartments. It was breathtaking. It was also not mine. I searched for something simple. Jeans, a loose sweater. I found them tucked away in a corner, as if they were remnants of a former version of me. The following afternoon, I decided to visit my parents without informing anyone. When I told the driver to change direction, he hesitated. "I'll need to confirm with Mr. Vale's office." "You work for me too now," I replied. He made the call anyway. We were halfway to my parents' house when my phone rang. Adrian. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice even. "To see my family." "You had a lunch scheduled with the foundation board." "No one told me it wasn't optional." There was a pause. "Nothing is optional anymore," he said quietly. "Not at this level." "I'm your wife, not an employee." Another pause, longer this time. "Don't blur those lines, Elena." The call ended. When I arrived at my parents' house, my mother hugged me tightly. She studied my face as if searching for something hidden beneath the polished surface. "You look beautiful," she said. "I feel busy," I answered. My father watched me carefully from the kitchen table. "Are you happy?" he asked directly. The question lingered in the air. "Yes," I said automatically. The word felt rehearsed. When I returned to Manhattan that evening, Adrian was waiting in the living room. He stood near the window, city lights reflecting in his gray eyes. "You don't make unilateral decisions," he said calmly. "I went to see my parents." "You disrupted a chain of commitments." "I'm not a meeting slot." His expression hardened slightly. "You represent stability, predictability. Investors value that." "And what do you value?" He stepped closer, his presence filling the space. "Control," he answered without hesitation. The honesty startled me more than anger would have. "Control over what?" "Over variables," he clarified. "Chaos destroys empires." I realized then that in his world, spontaneity was chaos, and I had just introduced it. That night he slept beside me, but there was an invisible distance between us. His body faced forward, unmoving, his breathing steady. I stared at the ceiling, replaying his words. "Nothing is optional anymore. Not at this level." For the first time since the wedding, I wondered what exactly I had stepped into, and whether I had signed more than a marriage certificate. 2 weeks into the marriage, I stopped trying to surprise him. Every movement in our life together had a structure. Breakfast at 8, meetings outlined in shared digital calendars. Even dinners were arranged 3 days in advance. If I suggested something spontaneous, a late-night walk, a movie at home without staff hovering nearby, Adrian would agree, but only after checking his phone, adjusting something invisible in the background. The penthouse no longer felt impressive. It felt monitored. Security staff rotated shifts in the lobby. 2 guards were always present near the private elevator. At first, I told myself it was necessary. Powerful men had enemies. But gradually, I noticed how often updates about my whereabouts were relayed back to his office. One afternoon, I asked Clara directly, "Is it standard for security to report when I leave the building?" She didn't hesitate. "Mr. Vale prefers to remain informed." Informed or in control? Her expression didn't change. Those terms are not mutually exclusive. That same evening, Adrian returned earlier than usual. He removed his watch and cufflinks methodically, placing them in a tray by the entrance. "You questioned Clara," he said. "I asked a reasonable question." "You implied distrust." "I implied I want privacy." He loosened his tie slowly. "Privacy is a luxury most people at our level cannot afford." "Our level," I repeated. "Or yours." His eyes met mine, steady and analytical. "You married into this." The words were not harsh. They were factual. I walked toward the window, crossing my arms. Below us, Manhattan pulsed with noise and life. Taxis weaving through traffic, people laughing on sidewalks, neon signs flickering. It felt far away. "I didn't marry a system," I said quietly. "I married you." "And I am the system," he replied. Silence followed. The first real argument happened 3 days later. A tabloid published photos of us leaving a gala. In one image, I looked distracted, my smile fading. The headline read, "Billionaire's young bride already bored?" I laughed when I saw it. Adrian did not. He stood in his office, tablet in hand, jaw tightened along the faint scar. "This is avoidable," he said. "It's gossip. It's perception. You can't control every camera angle. I can influence them." I studied him carefully. "Is that what this is about? Influence?" "It's about narrative." "And what's our narrative?" He walked toward me, placing the tablet down. Up close, I could see faint shadows beneath his eyes, the only visible sign that he was human, not machine. "Our narrative is strength, stability, strategic alignment." "Not love?" His expression flickered, almost imperceptibly. "Love is assumed," he said. "By who?" "By those who benefit from believing in it." The words felt rehearsed, like lines from a boardroom presentation. That night, he requested that I limit independent interviews. All media questions would be pre-approved. My social media accounts would be managed by a professional team to ensure consistency. When I hesitated, he added softly, "It protects you." From what, he didn't specify. Days blended into events, luncheons, fundraisers, private dinners with men who evaluated market trends between courses, women who studied my posture and tone as if scoring an exam. I perfected my smile, learned when to laugh, when to remain silent. But in private, something shifted further. Adrian became physically distant. He still touched my shoulder when guiding me through rooms, still kissed my cheek before leaving for meetings. Yet intimacy felt scheduled, efficient. One evening, as rain streaked down the glass walls of the bedroom, I tried to bridge the gap. "Do you ever feel tired?" I asked, tracing the line of his shoulder. "Of what?" "Of performing." He turned toward me slowly. "I don't perform," he said. "I execute." "And with me?" A pause. "With you," he replied carefully, "I optimize." The word landed heavily. "I'm not a project." "No," he agreed. "You're an investment." There it was. He said it without cruelty, without raised voice, as if explaining financial strategy. My throat tightened. In what way? In influence? In image? In legacy? And if I don't want to be part of that calculation? His gaze sharpened slightly. Everyone in my life is part of a calculation. I pulled my hand away. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who had guided me through candlelit dinners, but as someone who built structures, companies, networks, alliances, and expected them to function flawlessly, including me. The next morning, I reviewed the prenuptial agreement I had signed months earlier without reading every clause. The document was extensive, precise. In the event of divorce, I would receive a settlement tied to specific conditions: non-disclosure agreements, behavioral clauses, image protection. I realized then that even the possibility of an ending had been engineered in advance. When Adrian entered the room and saw the contract open on the desk, he stopped. "You should have read that more carefully before signing," he said. "I trusted you." "You still can." "Should I?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over, closed the folder gently, and placed his hand over mine. "You're overthinking this," he said calmly. But as his fingers tightened slightly, not painfully, just firmly enough to assert presence, I understood something new. Overthinking was the only thing in this marriage that still belonged entirely to me. The realization settled slowly, like fog creeping under a locked door. I began noticing details I had ignored before. Adrian's calls were never taken in front of me unless they were harmless. When his phone vibrated with a specific low tone, he would step into his office and close the glass door, activating the privacy tent that turned the walls opaque. Meetings labeled simply as V Consult appeared twice a week in his calendar, always late at night. I asked about them once. "Venture consultations," he replied smoothly. "High-level strategy." "With who?" "People who value discretion." It was not an answer. It was a boundary. One evening, while he was showering, his phone lit up on the bedside table. I hadn't intended to look, but the name flashing on the screen held my gaze. Sophia Laurent. No heart emoji, no obvious intimacy, just a name. The call stopped before I could react. A minute later, a message appeared. "We need to discuss the Zurich arrangement. She cannot know." My pulse quickened. She. The bathroom door opened. Steam drifted into the bedroom. Adrian emerged in a white robe, hair damp, expression relaxed. "Who is Sophia?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "A legal advisor." Why would a legal advisor say, "I cannot know about Zurich"? His eyes sharpened slightly, calculating. "You went through my phone?" It lit up. "That's not the point." "It is exactly the point," he said calmly. "Trust operates both ways." "And secrecy?" "Secrecy protects assets." "Am I an asset too?" His jaw tightened faintly. "You're my wife." That's not an answer. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Some negotiations are sensitive. International structures require discretion." "Why would your legal advisor refer to me?" "She didn't," he replied. "You inferred that." The logic was precise, deflective, controlled. But something in his tone had changed. It was firmer now, less patient. The next week, he announced we would be traveling to Switzerland. "For leisure?" I asked. "For alignment," he said. Zurich was pristine. Cold air, clean lines. We stayed in a private residence overlooking the lake. The architecture was minimalist. Glass, steel, white stone. Beautiful. Impersonal. On our second evening, Adrian left for what he described as a brief meeting. He wore a dark overcoat over a charcoal suit. His expression was unreadable. "I won't be long," he said. I watched from the window as a black car pulled away. An hour passed, then 2. Restlessness overtook me. I stepped outside onto the terrace, the cold biting against my bare arms. From there, I could see the neighboring property through a break in the trees. Lights glowed inside. Silhouettes moved. Curiosity overrode caution. I walked along the private path separating the estates. The gravel crunched softly under my shoes. As I approached closer, I recognized Adrian's profile through the glass. He stood facing a woman. She was tall, elegant, with dark hair pulled into a sleek bun. Even from a distance, I could see her posture, confident, familiar. She wore a fitted black dress and spoke with controlled intensity. Sophia. They were not touching, but they stood too close for formality. I couldn't hear the words, only see the tension in their gestures. At one point, she placed her hand briefly on his chest. Not affectionately, emphatically. He didn't move it away immediately. I stepped back before they could notice me. When he returned later that night, He appeared composed, almost refreshed. "Productive discussion," he said. "With Sophia?" I asked. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You followed me." "I saw enough." "What exactly did you see?" "You standing very close to your legal advisor." He removed his coat deliberately. "You're misinterpreting proximity." "Am I?" "Yes." The certainty in his voice was infuriating. "What is Zurich really about?" I demanded. He paused, considering how much to reveal. "It's about restructuring certain holdings." "Under her name?" His gaze sharpened. "You're venturing into territory you don't understand." "Then explain it." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "There are mechanisms in place to protect wealth from volatility." "Volatility like what?" "Divorce," he answered. The word struck harder than I expected. "You're protecting yourself from me." "I'm protecting everything I've built." "From your wife?" "From risk," he corrected. The implication hung in the air. I felt something shift inside me. Not heartbreak, not yet, but clarity. I was not a partner in his empire. I was a variable to be managed. That night, I lay awake in the unfamiliar Swiss bedroom, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. He slept easily. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the image of Sophia's hand against his chest. Not intimacy, negotiation. And I began to understand that in Adrian's world, even relationships could be restructured. We returned to New York 2 days later. On the flight back, Adrian worked almost the entire time. His laptop remained open, fingers moving with calm precision over the keyboard. He reviewed documents, sent encrypted emails, occasionally paused to think before typing a single sentence. I watched him from across the private cabin. His profile was sharp against the window light, composed, untouchable. At some point, he closed the laptop and looked at me directly. "You're distant," he said. "I'm observing." "Observing what?" "You." A faint smile touched his lips. "And what have you concluded?" "That you plan for endings before beginnings are finished." He studied me carefully, as if recalculating. "That's how stability is maintained," he replied. "And what happens when your plan becomes the reason for the ending?" He didn't answer. Back in Manhattan, the pace intensified. A major acquisition was underway. News outlets speculated daily. Adrian's face appeared on financial channels. Analysts praised his foresight. The narrative was strength, dominance, expansion. At home, he grew sharper. Shorter replies, fewer explanations, more instructions. Clara's presence became constant. She arrived early, left late. I overheard fragments of conversations about asset transfers, offshore accounts, strategic insulation. One evening, while Adrian was in his office, I walked in without knocking. He was on a video call. Sophia's face filled the screen. She looked different up close. Olive skin, dark eyes steady and intelligent, lips painted in muted red. She wore a white blouse beneath a tailored blazer. Controlled elegance. They both froze when they saw me. "I didn't realize this was confidential," I said evenly. Adrian muted the call. "We're in the middle of something." "I can see that." Sophia's image remained on the screen, watching. "I'd like to understand why my husband's financial protections require so much secrecy from his wife." Adrian stood slowly. "You're emotional." "I'm informed." He walked toward me, lowering his voice. "This conversation will happen privately." "It is private." He glanced toward the screen. Not like this. He ended the call. Silence filled the office. Do you trust me? He asked. I used to. That's not what I asked. Trust isn't a contract, Adrian. It's also not blind, he countered. Then stop treating me like a liability. His expression hardened for the first time since our marriage. You are young, he said carefully. You don't yet grasp the scale of what's at stake. Then teach me. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You either see me as a partner or you don't. He exhaled slowly. Partnership requires alignment. And what if I don't align with hiding assets in other countries? His eyes flashed, just briefly. You're repeating language you don't fully understand. Then explain Zurich. He stepped closer, his presence commanding. Zurich is insulation, he said. If markets collapse, if political climates shift, if legal claims arise. Legal claims from who? His silence answered enough. From me, I said quietly. He didn't deny it. That was the moment something fragile inside me cracked. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. You prepared for our failure before we even began, I said. I prepared for every scenario. And did you prepare for what that does to trust? His jaw tightened. Trust doesn't replace prudence. Love should. He looked at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Love doesn't protect capital, he said. I stepped back. And capital doesn't protect marriage. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then he spoke, softer this time. You wanted security. I wanted you. You have me. Do I? His expression flickered, frustration, maybe something else, but it disappeared quickly. You're spiraling, he said. This is temporary stress. Is Sophia temporary too? The question landed heavier than I intended. His voice cooled immediately. Sophia is indispensable to my operations. More indispensable than your wife? He didn't answer directly. They are different roles. Roles. Again, that word. I don't want to be a role, I said. He looked almost impatient now. You married into complexity. I married into you. And I am complex, he replied. The conversation ended not with resolution, but with distance. That night, he slept in the guest room for the first time. No announcement, no argument, just absence. I stood alone in the master bedroom, staring at the skyline that once felt magical. Now it felt like a reminder. Everything here belonged to him, even the silence. The separation inside the apartment became routine faster than I expected. He didn't return to the master bedroom the next night, or the one after. No argument, no discussion, just an unspoken reallocation of space. At public events, nothing changed. He still placed his hand at my waist, still leaned in close when photographers shouted our names, still kissed my cheek at calculated angles that looked intimate on camera. But the warmth was gone. 3 weeks later, the scandal broke. It started with a financial blog questioning irregular transfers between one of Adrian's European subsidiaries and a Swiss holding entity. Within hours, major outlets picked it up. Words like offshore shielding and spousal insulation began circulating. Spousal insulation. I saw the phrase on a news ticker while sitting in the living room. My name appeared below it. Elena Vale, 22, married the tech billionaire last year. Married the tech billionaire. That was my identity. Clara rushed in, tablet in hand, face tighter than usual. "We need to limit your exposure immediately," she said. "Why is my name in this?" "Because the transfers are dated shortly after your wedding." My stomach dropped. Adrian entered moments later, composed but visibly alert. His suit was immaculate, but there was tension in the set of his shoulders. "It's speculative," he said calmly. "They're connecting Zurich to me," I replied. "It's narrative construction." "You said it was insulation." "It is." "From me." He didn't respond. Within hours, reporters gathered outside the building. Cameras pointed upward. Headlines intensified. Did Vale shield billions from potential divorce? Is the young bride a pawn in a financial fortress? The word pawn lingered in my mind. Adrian held a press conference the next morning. I stood beside him as planned. He spoke confidently about responsible asset structuring and long-term stability. He denied wrongdoing, denied intent to evade anything. When a journalist asked directly, "Was this arrangement designed to protect your wealth from your wife?" the room went silent. Adrian's expression remained neutral. "My marriage is built on trust," he said smoothly. "Financial planning has nothing to do with personal doubt." The cameras flashed. Then they turned to me. "Mrs. Vale, were you aware of these protections?" Every instinct told me to follow the script, but something inside me refused. "I was aware that my husband plans for every outcome," I said carefully, "including ones I didn't believe in." A subtle ripple passed through the room. Adrian's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at my back. The headlines the next day were brutal. "Young wife hints at rift. Love or liability. Golden marriage under pressure." Back in the penthouse, the air felt charged. "You deviated," Adrian said once the doors closed. I told the truth. "You implied instability. There is instability." He stepped closer, voice lower now. "You don't understand the consequences of careless phrasing. I'm not your press release." "No," he agreed. "You're part of a larger structure." "I don't want to be." Silence. For the first time, I saw genuine irritation in his eyes. "This is temporary turbulence," he said. "It will pass." "At what cost?" "At none that matter." The words were precise, cold. "Does anything matter more to you than control?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "What?" "Winning." The honesty stunned me. Winning what? Everything. That night, I received a private message from an unknown number. It contained a single photo. Adrian and Sophia leaving a building in Zurich. Close, focused, alone. Beneath it, a sentence. "You deserve the full picture." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. When Adrian returned from a late meeting, I showed him the image. His face remained composed, but something hardened behind his eyes. "Who sent this?" he asked. "I don't know." "It's manipulation." "Is it inaccurate?" He held my gaze. "You're letting outsiders dictate your perception. I'm letting reality shape it." He exhaled slowly. "This is exactly why insulation exists. To protect you from me? To protect both of us from chaos." I stepped back. "You built a structure that assumes I will betray you." "I built a structure that assumes risk." "And I'm risk." "You're untested," he corrected. The word hit harder than betrayal. Untested. As if I were a volatile stock, not a person. I felt the last layer of illusion peel away. "I will not live as a contingency plan," I said quietly. His voice softened slightly, almost persuasive. "You're reacting emotionally." "No," I replied. "I'm reacting clearly." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Just a fraction, but enough. Outside, the city roared as always. Inside, the marriage I had once believed in stood exposed. Not as a fairy tale, not even as a tragedy yet, but as a negotiation where only one side had prepared for war. The invitation arrived 2 days later. Annual Vail Industries Global Summit. Black tie, international press, investors flying in from London, Singapore, Dubai. It was Adrian's largest public appearance of the year, a declaration of dominance after weeks of speculation. "You'll stand with me," he said that morning, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. It wasn't a question. "I always do," I replied. His eyes met mine in the reflection. For a brief second, something unreadable passed between us. Tension, calculation, maybe anticipation. The summit was held in a glass tower downtown, the top floor converted into a stage overlooking the city. Screens displayed market growth charts. His name glowed in bold letters across a massive backdrop. I wore a deep emerald gown chosen by Clara. It fit flawlessly, accentuating my waist and shoulders. My hair fell straight and sleek down my back. I looked composed, controlled. Inside, I felt steady in a way I hadn't before. Reporters crowded the entrance. "Mrs. Vail, are you concerned about the restructuring allegations? Is your marriage affected? Did you sign away your rights knowingly?" I didn't answer. Adrian placed his hand on my back, guiding me forward with that familiar pressure. To cameras, it looked protective. To me, it felt final. He delivered his keynote with precision, spoke of expansion, resilience, strategic foresight. Investors applauded. Numbers flashed across screens. Confidence radiated from him like engineered light. Then came the Q&A. A journalist stood. "Mr. Vail, critics say your offshore structures suggest you anticipated marital instability. Would you care to respond?" The room quieted. Adrian's voice remained calm. "Strategic planning is not a reflection of personal doubt. It's responsible leadership." Another voice followed. "Mrs. Vail, do you agree?" All eyes turned to me. For a fraction of a second, I considered the script. Smile, nod, support. But clarity has a strange effect. It removes fear. "I believe planning for failure shapes the outcome," I said evenly. A ripple moved through the audience. Adrian's posture remained straight, but I felt the tension in the air beside him. "Are you suggesting your marriage is unstable?" the journalist pressed. "I'm suggesting," I replied, "that a marriage built on contingency isn't built on trust." Cameras flashed violently now. Adrian turned toward me slightly, still composed, but his jaw tightened along the scar. "We are aligned," he said smoothly, stepping closer to the microphone. "My wife is expressing a philosophical perspective, not a personal grievance." "I'm expressing reality," I said. Silence fell heavier than before. "Did you know about the Zurich arrangement before or after signing your prenup?" another reporter asked. I felt Adrian's hand press more firmly against my back, subtle but unmistakable. "After," I answered. A collective inhale swept the room. Adrian removed his hand slowly. "That's inaccurate," he said calmly. I turned toward him fully now. "No," I replied, "it isn't." For the first time since I had known him, his composure cracked. Not dramatically, but enough. His eyes hardened. The mask thinned. "This isn't the setting for this," he murmured under his breath. "It's the only setting you understand," I whispered back. The room buzzed with tension. "Mrs. Vale, are you saying you were misled?" someone shouted. I didn't raise my voice. "I'm saying I was managed." The word echoed. Managed. Adrian stepped forward, reclaiming the microphone. "This line of questioning is inappropriate," he said firmly. "My marriage is not a public spectacle." "It became one when you structured it like a merger," I said quietly, but close enough for nearby microphones to capture. The screens behind us still displayed growth charts and projections, numbers, strategy, expansion. None of it included me. I looked out over the sea of faces, investors, journalists, executives, people who measured value in percentages and risk assessments, and I understood something with absolute certainty. If I stayed, I would always be a variable in his equation. "Effective immediately," I said clearly, before I could second-guess myself, "I will be filing for divorce." The word detonated in the silence. Cameras erupted, voices overlapped. Adrian stared at me, disbelief flashing openly now. "You're being impulsive," he said under his breath. "No," I replied, "I'm being decisive. You have no idea what this will cost you." "I do," I said, "and it's still worth it." His expression shifted from shock to something colder. "You signed agreements," he reminded me quietly. "I signed them without full knowledge." His eyes narrowed. "Be careful." The warning was soft, controlled, but I no longer felt small. "I'm not your investment," I said steadily, "and I refuse to be your risk calculation." For a moment, the entire empire seemed to hang in suspension around us. Screens glowing, investors watching, press recording every breath. Adrian straightened, reclaiming his posture. "If that's your decision," he said evenly into the microphone, "then we will handle it privately." There it was again, control. But this time, it no longer reached me. I stepped away from him, from the stage, from the structure he had built around us. The cameras followed. And for the first time since I had said yes on that terrace overlooking the ocean, I felt something unmistakable. Not fear. Freedom. By the time I returned to the penthouse that night, the story had already spread across every major outlet. Billionaire's wife files for divorce on live stage. Markets react to personal turmoil. Speculation surged. Analysts debated whether the public split would impact investor confidence. My decision was dissected like a financial anomaly. Inside the apartment, it was silent. Adrian stood near the window, jacket removed, tie loosened. The city lights reflected in his gray eyes, but there was no softness in them now. "You've triggered volatility," he said calmly. "I ended a marriage," I replied. "The volatility was already there." He turned toward me slowly. "You humiliated me." "I told the truth." "You made it public." "You made it strategic." His jaw tightened. "Do you understand what you've walked away from?" "Yes." "Do you?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Private security, access, influence. A future secured beyond imagination." "I don't need a secured cage." "It wasn't a cage." "It was." Silence pressed in around us. For a moment, he looked almost tired, not defeated, but forced to recalibrate. "You won't win this legally," he said evenly. "The agreements are airtight." "I'm not trying to win," I answered. I'm trying to leave. He studied me as if searching for hesitation. You'll receive what the contract allows, he continued. Nothing more. I don't want more. That's naive. No, I said quietly. It's clear. The next weeks unfolded in controlled chaos. Lawyers replaced stylists in my schedule. Documents stacked where invitations once lay. Interviews were requested and declined. Public statements were issued, short, neutral, carefully phrased. I moved into a temporary apartment downtown. Smaller, quiet, mine. The first night there, I unpacked my own suitcase. No staff, no curated wardrobe. Just jeans, sweaters, a few dresses I had chosen for myself. It felt unfamiliar and honest. Adrian never called directly again. Communication filtered through attorneys. Clara disappeared from my life entirely, her efficiency redirected elsewhere. But occasionally I would see him on television, composed, authoritative, discussing market rebounds. The scandal had faded into background noise. Investors trusted performance more than personal stability. He had insulated his empire well. The divorce settlement was finalized 3 months later. The prenup held. I received a structured payout, substantial by ordinary standards, insignificant compared to his wealth. I signed the final papers in a quiet law office, my signature steady. When I walked outside, the air felt lighter than it had in a year. No security detail followed me. No driver opened a door. I hailed my own cab. Weeks passed. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from. Had dinner with my parents without checking a schedule. Returned to a part-time role at a small gallery, something connected to who I had been before everything became calculated. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Adrian unexpectedly at a private art event. He looked the same. Tailored suit, controlled posture, scar faint against his jaw. Powerful, unshaken. Our eyes met across the room. He approached. "You look well," he said. "So do you." Silence hovered briefly between us. "You adjusted quickly," he observed. I adjusted honestly. A faint smile touched his lips, not mocking, not warm, analytical. "You cost yourself access to everything." I gained access to myself. His gaze lingered, searching for regret. He didn't find it. "You were never weak," he said after a moment. "I was inexperienced. And now? Now I understand that protection without trust is just containment." He nodded once, slowly. "We wanted different structures," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "You wanted insulation. I wanted partnership." Another pause. "For what it's worth," he added, "you disrupted more than headlines." "In a bad way?" "In an unpredictable one." For a second, I saw something almost like respect in his eyes. Then it was gone. He stepped back. "I don't regret marrying you," he said evenly. "I do," I replied. "Not cruelly, honestly." He held my gaze a moment longer, then turned and walked away, absorbed back into the world of investors and influence. I watched him disappear into a circle of tailored suits and strategic conversations, and I felt nothing heavy in my chest. No longing, no fear, no envy, only clarity. At 22, I believed marrying a billionaire meant entering a fairy tale reinforced with steel. I was wrong. It was a fortress, and fortresses are designed to keep things in and out. I left with less money than I could have imagined, but with something he never calculated: freedom. 6 months after the divorce, my name stopped appearing next to his in headlines. The markets stabilized. His companies expanded into 2 new regions. The scandal became a footnote in financial commentary, an emotional disruption that had failed to dent performance. I became invisible to his world, and visible to myself. The apartment I rented was small compared to the penthouse, but it had uneven wooden floors and windows that opened without automation. In the mornings, I made my own coffee. I burned the first few attempts because I had forgotten how to measure without instruction. There was no assistant sending schedules, no security waiting downstairs, no one monitoring the direction of my day. At first, the silence felt unstable. I had grown accustomed to structure, even when I resented it. I would wake expecting notifications that never came. My phone remained quiet, unless a friend texted or my mother called to ask if I was eating properly. I returned to the gallery 3 days a week. The owner, Margaret, was in her late 50s with short silver hair and paint-stained fingers. She wore oversized glasses and spoke bluntly. She had known me before the marriage. "You look thinner," she said on my first day back. "I feel lighter," I replied. The gallery smelled of varnish and old wood. Artists came and went, discussing color theory and emotional weight instead of quarterly earnings. No one asked about offshore structures. No one evaluated me for alignment. I learned to exist without being curated. There were difficult days. Days when articles resurfaced online and strangers commented about gold diggers and ambition. Days when I questioned whether I had overreacted, whether compromise could have salvaged something. But then I would remember the word he used: untested. And I would remember how small I had felt standing beside him, not because of his height or power, but because I had allowed myself to become an accessory to his certainty. One evening, my father came to visit. He sat at my small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. "You're different," he observed. "Better or worse?" I asked. "Stronger," he said. I smiled faintly. "I didn't leave because I hated him," I admitted. "I left because I couldn't find myself in his world." My father nodded slowly. "Then you made the right trade." Trade. Even he used the language of exchange. But this time, it felt balanced. A year after the summit, Vail Industries hosted another global conference. I saw it on the news while eating dinner alone. Adrian stood on stage again, confident as ever. The numbers behind him were larger now. A reporter asked about personal distractions affecting leadership. He replied smoothly, "Personal experiences refine strategy." No mention of me. No need. I studied his face on the screen. He looked unchanged. But I understood something now that I hadn't before. He had not married for love alone. He had married for expansion, image, legacy, narrative. And when I stepped outside the structure he designed, I disrupted his equation. Not his empire, but his certainty. That was enough. Later that night, I walked through the city without purpose. No destination, no schedule. The air was cool. Traffic lights changed without my involvement. People laughed outside restaurants. Music spilled from open doors. I stopped in front of a jewelry store window. Diamonds glittered under precise lighting. Perfect. Cut to reflect maximum brilliance. I remembered the ring he had placed on my finger overlooking the ocean. Flawless. Heavy. Impressive. I had returned it during the settlement. Not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. Love cannot be engineered like a portfolio. It cannot be insulated against risk without stripping it of trust. It cannot be optimized without losing its pulse. At 22, I believed security meant protection from uncertainty. At 23, I understood that uncertainty is the only space where something real can exist. I turned away from the glass and continued walking. No driver followed. No camera flashed. No hand guided my back. The night belonged to no one but me. And for the first time since I had said yes on a terrace overlooking the ocean, I felt something steady and uncalculated. Not status, not victory, not revenge. Just autonomy. I married a billionaire at 22, and I regretted it. Not because he lacked power, but because I nearly lost mine.